class. I think we're recording here. Find out for sure in a moment. So I wanted to get back with you. I told you that I would record and post a screencast yesterday, and that didn't happen for some reason or another. So I'm going to just make some comments here. I don't have a lot to add to my comments yesterday, but you'll notice when you get to your notes that we had talked about integration, I think, even the day before. And essentially integration in the larger sense of world history refers to forces that sort of draw different parts of the world together. So world historians are oftentimes aware of really two countervailing tendencies that happen throughout history. And one is integration, where the globe, the world, and various regions and peoples and technologies and civilizations and nation states are coming together in a collaborative way. That can happen through trade, it can happen through international treaties, it can happen through reforms for workers, what have you. And then the other countervailing force is differentiation. And so at different times in world history, there has been perceivable integration and perceivable differentiation. And part of what Jerry Bentley was getting at in his article the other day is that sometimes using the unit of analysis of ocean basins or river systems could even do this, it allows for perhaps a more integrative telling of the events of world history. And I'll leave it at that for now. And so maritime regions versus area studies, we already talked about this, but the idea is that area studies are essentially the inland stories, and area studies tend to focus on differences because it focuses on a unit of analysis that's by definition distinct from other areas, because we know that most of the trade and exchange and collaboration that happens across the globe is done through bodies of water and ocean basins and river systems and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of a contrast there. And we talked a little bit about this the other day, so I won't go into too much detail here. And we're going to be talking about the Pacific Century more on the final slide that I present here. So, little review, we did this in class. We talked about how units of analysis, there are very many levels, and nation states are an example, but they're a relatively recent example because nation states can't be said to have really existed until the last couple hundred years of human experience. So, of course, an ancient world history course like ours is not going to have a whole lot to say about the nation state. Civilizations, by contrast, are a really useful unit of analysis for telling the story of ancient world history, and we will be wrestling with some of those civilizations. And we sort of did even today, right, when we were talking briefly about the Maya and how memory and history are at play in the experience of the Maya and interpretations that world historians have come up with as a result of developments in recent decades that have helped us crack the code and decipher what the Maya glyphs, or ancient form of writing, what that meant. Okay? And regions, talked a little bit about my world regional geography course and how that tries to tell the story of differences between world regions by dividing the world into essentially 10 different regions. And of course, sea and ocean basins, which is important to Jerry Bentley's essay. And then finally, systems. And I talked briefly in class about triangular trade. And we could also talk about global supply chain systems. I mentioned Walmart and how what a sort of sophisticated, high-tech supply chain database they have, such that when we buy an individual item, if you shop at Walmart, that instantly, by virtue of the checker checking out your item, it communicates with the global supply chain that there is an item missing in College Place, Washington, that needs to be replaced in the not too distant future. So, anyway, where I wanted to close, and this is what we want to talk about here with the little time we have today, is the Pacific century. And so as a unit of analysis, we can apply some of our tools here. And I was talking about how in the 21st century, the 21st century is oftentimes referred to as the Pacific century. And that is, in many ways, an ocean basin unit of analysis. It's talking about things going on in the Pacific. And this phrase references the countries that ring the Pacific Rim. And I apologize, these images aren't particularly helpful because they're not properly layered. But I will still proceed. So it's an ocean basin. But to really understand, when world historians look back at this period, if in fact the 21st century does turn out to become the quote-unquote Pacific century, they'll probably want to have an appreciation for the role of chronology that it plays in our best understanding of this, this new unit of analysis that historians may well be using to tell the story of the past, when the 21st century is in fact in the past. Because chronology is the way in which cultures view the passage of time. And of course, we know in the West generally there has been a linear progression of time, and that linear progression tends to tell the story, I guess I'll do it this way, tends to tell the story of a future that is ever better and better than the past. We know in the U.S. sometimes we talk about the American dream. One function of that otherwise fictitious notion is that young people will keep experiencing life better than their parents experienced it. And that would, of course, be a story of linear progress that improves over time. From an East Asian perspective, chronology would most likely be told in a more cyclical manner. So that's a general, and there were some good points brought up in class the other day, how, politically speaking, democracy, at least in the United States, is more cyclical in the terms of elections, right? Every 4 years, we either have a new president or that president stands for re-election. And that is not obviously currently the case in China. In fact, President Xi has just been granted essentially a lifetime appointment if he so chooses to use that. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Periodization, we want to know, as we tell the story of the Pacific century, what are the critical events that are happening and have happened on both sides, on all sides of the Pacific Rim. We could tell stories of Japan and China's relationship. We could tell stories of the United States and Canada. I have a feeling that the trade treaty that has just been signed on the eastern rim of the Pacific basin is probably a part of the history that would even factor its way into the Pacific century, and the degree to which the U.S. and China either continue or fail to collaborate in the realm of trade is a story that very much remains to be told, and probably can't be told historically for another several decades. And, oops, I overdid it. Yeah, this picture also is designed to show you, this is the Three Gorges Dam in China, and it sort of tells the story of China accomplishing sort of great feats. And there's an interesting connection here because we have the very modern feat of building this dam, which I believe is the largest dam in the history of the world. But if we go back, see this image, we have the Great Wall of China, which of course is also an epic undertaking. And so in some ways we can tell a story of Chinese periodization through the accomplishment of very large sort of epic feats. And with that, I will stop.